Hey, IB History Scholars, it's Mr. Newcomb here. I want to continue with the discussion on topic 11, cause and effects of 20th century wars. In part two here, I want to look at civil wars and primarily the Spanish and Chinese Civil War. So looking at the origins and causes of the Spanish Civil War, this is going to go back and take a look at some of the problems occurring in the 19th century. Spain has a history of political instability that's dating back to the 19th century. Regional divisions as well as conservatism is playing a part here. The rise of the militant left wing intensified the divisions, and there is that social economic side to it. Conservative forces in the church and the army is going to resist change. Keeping the status quo is going to be critical. The dictatorship of Primo de Rivera failed to solve any of the underlying problems. The Second Spanish Republic that replaced de Rivera is going to be plagued with problems, instability. It's going to go back and forth between left and right wing, and the reforms that is going to be initiated is only going to increase the division. And then ultimately in 1936, we're going to see a military coup occur once the creation of a Popular Front, a coalition government of the left that includes anarchists, socialists, liberals, and a murder of a very popular right-wing leader, Sotelo, is going to provoke the military coup in 1936, which is going to have Francisco Franco as one of the principal leaders here. So when we look at the nature and the practice of the Civil War here, I think one thing that's going to be stand out is the role of the foreign powers in it. And so the military revolt of 1936 developed into a full-scale civil war. Foreign volunteers are going to come in. You've got the Lincoln and the Washington brigades. They're going to help out the Popular Front, which is the left, and they sometimes are called Republicans as well. And then you got foreign powers like Germany, Italy, and Soviet Union. This is an opportunity for an ideological conflict to play out, and so Germany and Italy are going to back the fascist nationalists led by Francisco Franco, and then you will have the Soviet Union that is going to play a role here in backing the Republicans. The problems for the Popular Front left resulted in defeats in 1939. You have divisions. At sometimes they will argue and fight against each other, the anarchists, the socialists, and the communists. Failure of Western powers to help out. Non-intervention, so we're talking about key powers like Great Britain and France, and Franco's superior manpower and resources ultimately is going to win out. And a reason for Franco's superior manpower and resources, especially in resources, might simply be because of Germany and Italy there playing a role here. The war was similar to the Second World War. Civilians are going to be targeted. Guernica would be an example here, where the nationalists target civilians. Blurring of distinction between civilians and soldiers as well. Once the region is taken over, there is some killing that will occur by both sides. And the role of technology. This again is a precursor to the Second World War, and some of that technology used in that war is definitely going to be used in this one. The airplanes, big guns, etc. So when we look at the effects and the results of the Spanish Civil War, foreign intervention contributed definitely to the outcome of the war. It favored the nationalists here, and the nationalists again were fascists led by Francisco Franco. The war caused a great deal of bitterness and desire for revenge. And so as a result of that, Franco is going to set up concentration camps. You're going to have reprisals against any of the left-leaning Popular Front supporters. Punishment and executions will go on. Hundreds of thousands of opposition, and civilians are going to be executed here. Franco's dictatorship will last until 1975. The war had some effects in terms of social change. Traditional and repressive rule was established and remained until 1975, so it was a step back in many ways here. Spain was isolated because it was a fascist regime. It's not until the Cold War, so not until the 1950s, did Spain once again reemerge, and it became a client state of the United States as we try to find a way to counter the spread of communism. It's going to remain economically stagnant until the 1950s, and then once it is brought into the Cold War camp of the United States, then you're going to start seeing an economic revival occur here. After 1975, the country begins to modernize socially and politically here. The second civil war that I would like to look at is the Chinese Civil War here. And when we look at the origins and the causes of the Chinese Civil War, again, we have to go back until the early part of the 20th century, maybe even into the 19th century as well. China was a weak country. It had been dominated by European powers. It had been carved up. It was humiliated in a defeat by Japan in 1895 that resulted in the loss of Taiwan and more of an influence in the Korean Peninsula. The Revolution of 1911 began a process of change. It led to a military dictatorship and the rise of warlordism. And so as a result of that instability, you do see the emergence of two main factions, the Kuomintang, the GMD, and the CCP, or the Chinese Communist Party, is going to eventually emerge here. Fourth of May movement, resentment to the Treaty of Versailles that came out in 1919. They felt that they were being disrespected by European powers. And so that kind of kickstarts a sense of nationalism here. And so nationalism and communism merge as possible agents of change. And both factors work to end the warlords' influence. And so the nationalists would turn on the communists once they feel they got warlordism under control here. And to clarify, nationalists are associated with the Kuomintang, or the GMD. All right, and then they turn on the communists about 1926-27, and it's become known as the White Terror. The Civil War breaks out, and the attacks on the communists nearly succeeded in crushing the movement. The communists, though, were engaged in factionalism, and so if the communists are going to win, they got to end factionalism altogether. And so Mao has a dispute with the 28 Bolsheviks. The long march in 1934 and 35 during the Civil War greatly reduced Mao's forces, but at the same time, it helps him consolidate his power. He's able to engage in a rectification campaign, get rid of any of the Bolsheviks, the 28 Bolsheviks' influence, his ideology of a peasant guerrilla warfare takes over, and his system of communism wins over the others. He builds his base, and his base is his peasant, is the peasantry. And so Mao definitely is beginning to emerge as the primary communist leader here. The Sino-Japanese War is going to delay the Civil War, and the GMD still view the communists as the main threat. During the Sino-Japanese War, the communists became stronger, and that's the 70-20-10. I had referenced that in an earlier recording in regards to Mao, but 70% is where they're going to focus on the The communists are going to focus on expanding their influence, 20% against the GMD and 10% against the Japanese. So during the Second Sino-Japanese War, the GMD bore the brunt of the fighting with Japan. Mao received some aid from the Soviet Union, but really his strengths were his peasant base, the countryside, the tactics, and his leadership. So you can make a claim that the help from the Soviet Union really didn't influence him that much. The GMD did receive lots of aid from the United States, but a lot of it could have been lost on the fact that there was corruption and factionalism. The GMD themselves created many of their own problems. They failed to deal with problems, and they were brutal towards the peasants. So realistically, at the end of the day here, you have the communists end up winning the Civil War here. The establishment of a communist region in a large area will have a profound effect on the world here. And so in 1949, you did see the creation of the People's Republic of China. The social impact here is the lives of peasants and women are going to change. It's going to be more progressive. Attack on the elite and the middle class, and there'll be a cultural revolution that will occur in China. The political impact here is you've got the dominance of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, after 1949, and Mao does consolidate his power as the primary leader, and then the reunification campaign begins, bringing regions like Tibet into the part of the People's Republic of China. The economic impact is you got land redistribution and the 5-year plans, so very similar to the Soviet Union here. A break from it, though, could be like the Great Leap Forward, which is the second 5-year plan that turns into be an ultimate disaster. And then you got the foreign policy. China's going to be isolated by the superpowers. Soviet Union and China, they're not on the same page in the type of communism, and the United States is not on the same page with China because they're a communist state. They're not going to have a seat at the United Nations until the 1970s, and so they're in the eyes of the international community, they lack a little sense of legitimacy here. All right, so this puts an end to the Civil War and the part 2 of topic 11, cause and effects of 20th century wars.